Homemade beef and noodles starts with delicious roast that is seared off, some vegetables are added, and it slowly roasts until it melts and falls apart in the oven. Then you cook the noodles in that juice that's created. It's a delicious dish, so much flavor, it's comfort, it's home, it's what we're gonna make. So when we're doing beef and noodles, there's not a lot of components that go into it, so you want each one to have as much flavor as we can. Now, this is not beef stroganoff. This is not more of a rich sauce with cream and mushrooms on top of noodles. No. This is beef, and a good beef. You want it to have a really good flavor. And then it's pretty much just a few vegetables to give it a little bit more oomph, and then the noodles. So everything needs to shine through. So we're gonna start with our roast right here. Now, I have two because that's what I found. You can a lot of times just find one larger one too. So whether you have two smaller ones, one larger one, doesn't matter. What I'm doing is making sure to salt them well. Now, the reason we do this, we salt and pepper, is before I brown them, which the browning is just gonna give them more flavor, salt and pepper is gonna also add that seasoning right at that base level. So I wanna do it on all sides, so I'm gonna flip them, do it again, and you can see how beautiful these are. Whether you do a rump or a chuck roast, they have great, they have some fat on them, but not too much fat. They're gonna cook for quite a while and just slowly roast in the oven. And that's gonna melt all that little veining you see in the meat and gonna make it tender and fall apart, because at the end we're gonna just shred these. So what I love about this is, this is a Midwestern staple. It is sometimes considered an Amish staple. I grew up actually Mennonite, and this was something we had every so often because it's just really good and it's one of those classics. So now that it's salted and it's peppered, we're gonna take it over, and I have some heat going right here on the Dutch oven. So this is gonna go from here to the oven eventually, where it's gonna fully cook. But you can see my oil has been heating up, and I wanna make sure the oil's hot because it's gonna shimmer a little bit, but it also means it's gonna have a nice sear when I put this in. There it is. So I'm gonna put them both in, then I'm gonna flip them once until they're well browned, and we'll keep moving on. You can see that meat is beautifully browned and kind of has a crust now on both sides. So the meat isn't near cooked at all. All this is doing is building flavor. And I think we kind of forget sometimes, and I'm putting it back on that same pan because we're gonna put it back in and let it cook. We forget that building flavor is super important. And so that's what I'm doing over here too. I have all these vegetables going, and you can see I'm dicing them fairly small. So I have celery, I have carrot, and now I have onion. And what we wanna do is these are gonna slowly just cook with that slow roast of that roast in the oven. And they're gonna almost melt into the sauce that it's creating. And then that sauce that it's creating, that juice, that jus, whatever you wanna call it, at the bottom of that Dutch oven is going to then be what the noodles cook in, and they're gonna soak in all that flavor. So all of this is just building on each other and making sure that we really just capitalize on the flavor, because that's what's important here. When you have a meal and you go to the work of making sure you're using good ingredients, good food, you wanna make sure it tastes good, you wanna make sure it's worthwhile, and that's what this is about. So I have my onion, I have my carrot, and I have my celery. I'm gonna just take it over here and put it right into that hot oil that the meat was cooking in. Now you can see the meat left some of that brown bits in the bottom. That's gonna be flavor that's gonna actually come up as this is cooking and work into it. So we're gonna keep putting this in there, and we're gonna add a few other flavorings. So with the vegetables, I want a few other flavorings. So we're gonna do some garlic, and you can see I just took the ends off of the garlic, that root end, and then I like to lightly smash them because then it just takes off all of that husk, and then they melt into it too. And I think that's what's important to remember is garlic, when it slowly cooks, slowly roasts, it becomes sweet and it just gets meltingly soft. It's like when you roast garlic and you can spread it over something delicious like bread. It's really the same idea. And I just love to do that. So instead of just chopping all of it up, you can just leave it like this. We'll throw that here in a minute, and we can talk about the herbs. So I want this to have a little bit of an herbal note, but not overly strong. Beef and noodles usually isn't heavy on herbs. So I have just a few sprigs of thyme, which will lightly just flavor it. And now I have a beautiful bunch of some parsley I ran out to the garden to get. I'm gonna take off some of the leaves on top because there's no reason to me to let these slowly roast. We'll use those at the end. But you know what has so much flavor? Yeah, the stems themselves. These stalks of parsley have an immense amount of flavor. Now, sometimes they can be fibrous. Sometimes they're not really fun to eat. But if you throw them into any soup or stew you're doing, like I'm gonna do, that is when I think the magic happens with them, and you need to do nothing. So I'm going to actually just tie them up just just a little tie here. It's nothing special at all. And what this is gonna do is just allow them so we can later on pull them out. Yeah, it's that easy. And then we'll just be done. So I'm gonna put the garlic and this right in here. And we're gonna let all this soften for a while. So I want that vegetable to really kind of soften, get a little bit of color on it before we put this back into the oven to really cook. So we're gonna let these roast. We're gonna let them come together, and then we'll put the meat back. So if you come in here, you can see that this has really started to cook down, soften, sweat the vegetables, give them just a little bit of color that they're picking up from the bottom of that wonderful Dutch oven. So now what we can do is put everything back together so it can really just start cooking slowly in the oven, which is the best part now. So we have our meat, we're gonna put that back in there. And remember what we're doing is we're building all these flavors, and then what's gonna happen is those flavors we build are gonna actually cook the noodles and go into the noodles, all that flavor. So what we have is, you can either use pre-made beef stock or something you make at home. You can also just put in water if you want to, and you can actually just put that, like a beef bouillon in with it. So any type of like that, you know, the condensed beef bouillon, so you don't have to make your own. I do this all the time, and there's no reason that you need to cook it separate or need to actually put it in separately. You can just put it in the water. It will cook into the water. It will do the same type of flavoring, and it will all be done. So whatever works for you. I always say, you know what? In the kitchen, you have to do what works for you. So now we have our stock in here. We have our meat. I'm letting it come up. You can see it's starting to simmer. And when you see that simmering around the edges, you know it's ready to go into the oven. So we can now just turn that off. I'm gonna need hot pads because it gets hot. You have to have something that's oven safe, and it will pick up the heat all around it. So we're gonna put this right into the oven, and it'll be nice. I love, there's something about a Dutch oven that I feel like putting it right in the oven just feels comforting. So this has roasted, and oh, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? To me, there's nothing, it smells like the most delicious roast in here. And how you know when it's done, you can check it in the pot too. But you want it just to be like meltingly fall apart. So you can just take a fork even, and you see how, look how that just shreds into like nothing. Like that's exactly what you want for that beef. So when that is working, you know that it's done. This is super simple. So we're taking this out. And what we have left in here is all that flavor. So I do also want to take out, remember we tied together those parsley stems, a little bit of thyme. You want to take those out and just discard them. Same if a little bit fell out of it there. And you can see now we have this beautiful, rich broth, which is exactly what you want. So we're gonna take this over. I'm gonna grab my other hot pad because it's still hot. It came from the oven, so always remember that, just like a cast iron pan. These are gonna be hot. So we're gonna take this over, and we wanna bring it to a boil. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna cook the noodles right in this. Now, while it cooks down, we'll have to supplement it with a little bit more water, but not a lot. You don't want to overdo it. You want it just to be all sopped up. So we're going to bring this to a boil, and we're going to throw the noodles in. This is at a boil. It doesn't take long. It was coming from the oven. And the important thing here is just that we're using egg noodles. You want to use a good egg noodle because, guess what? That's what you should use with beef and noodles. So we're going to let them cook in this. Now, you don't need to always cover your noodles with tons of boiling water. I want them to really soak in all this and not have to drain it off. So I'm cooking them in just enough. And you know what's one of those things, if you notice it's getting down, they're not quite cooked, we can add a little bit more water. But I want them to soak in all the water that's in there, soak in that flavor. Then we're gonna shred the beef, we're gonna put it together. It's gonna be a meal. So these have been cooking, and you just have to check them by the time, obviously, that noodles take. And if you need to, like I said, you just add a little bit more water, but look how beautiful they are. They sop up all that jus and all that sauce that was created. And so all that flavor now is in the noodle. Isn't that the best thing? I think that's just wonderful. And so they have so much flavor in them. So we shredded the beef because that's what you need to do to make it more enjoyable. And this is what true beef and noodles to me is. Now, there are shortcuts to beef and noodles you could do, but guess what? They're not gonna have the flavor. They're not gonna have near the nuances this does. So this to me is like when you want the best beef and noodles and you really want to have it be that like comfort food and worth every bite. My thing with comfort food is all food should be comfort. It should nourish you, it should have comfort. Make it worth it if it's gonna be something you're not gonna have every day. Make it more like the best you can have because that's what makes it delicious. So we have that. I like to put a little bit of fresh parsley in it. I think it just kind of wakes it up. A fresh green, kind of like a citrus would even, like it just adds a little bit of oomph to it, and I like that. So then you can just serve it, and you can see it thickens with the starches in the pasta. That to me is like what is so great about it. You get like this beautiful beef and noodle, which noodles are the hardest thing to eat on camera. Okay. You know what I love? There's a real, it sounds weird, but a meatiness, that beefiness, that flavor is throughout. And it started by really browning the roast like we did. That really just sets off the layers of flavor. And then those vegetables that we just slowly sauteed and then let roast until they just melted away, that adds so much flavor. So once it's all done and that flavor goes back into the noodles, you have all those layers working together, and it really is delicious. It's a great beef and noodle. If you haven't had beef and noodle or you haven't heard of that, welcome to the Midwest, but I think you're gonna fall in love with it. It's a great dish. It's homey, it's comfort, it's rustic, it's delicious. So what do I hope you do with this? I hope you make it. I hope you share this video around so everyone can see that good food is doable. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Check my website, wyseguide.com, for this recipe. All my other recipes are on there. Until next time, make something comforting, make something nostalgic, but just make something good. That's the point.